Hello, everyone. So I've never met Myra Kalman before today, but she's been a wonderful part of my life. When our daughter Roxy was little, someone gave her Hey Willie, See the Pyramids. We loved reading that book together, and I don't know who laughed more, Roxy or me. Then we read it to her brother Eli when he came along, and now Roxy is reading Hey Willie to her own brand new baby boy. When our dog died, beloved dog was there. And when I wanted a new copy of Strunk and White's Elements of Style, Myra's illustrations were there. Well, you get the idea. I bet a lot of you have had similar experiences with Myra Kalman's fantastically cockeyed imagination. You've seen her work on posters in museums, in the New York Times, on Broadway, and of course in bookstores, whether illustrating New Yorker covers, investigating democracy in America, creating a stage curtain for David Byrne's American Utopia, or writing and illustrating books for children and adults. Through her work, she responds to life's big questions with a marvelous wit and so much wisdom, finding hope without avoiding harsh realities. We're here to talk about her life, her work, and Remorse, the subject of her most recent book, Still Life with Remorse, which I heartily recommend. It's beautiful to read and beautiful to look at. Welcome, Myra, to At Lunch.
Whoop.
Hi.
Thank you very much. That was lovely. I'm happy I have accomplishments.
You have a lot of them.
I have to remind myself. Thank you.
Well, I'll be happy to keep reminding you throughout the next 45 minutes because there are a lot of them. And so as I was preparing to talk to you today, I read an interview with you where the interviewer asked how you prepared to do interviews. She meant when you were interviewing other people, but instead you said to her, you prepared for interviews by reading everything you could about yourself. And so what I want to know is, what did you find out?
Right, which is totally not true. I made that up. Not only did I misunderstand the question, I made up the answer. So now you know what world I inhabit. And the nice thing is I don't remember anything that I've said. So there you go. I think we can just somehow we'll skip to the next thing, whatever that is.
So do you really not know how much you've accomplished? I feel that's crazy.
No, but you know what? Of course I would be disingenuous not to say, oh, I've done a lot of stuff. But I think that what happens is that that sense of really being in the moment and really wanting to do something new and to do a really good, this time I'm going to do a really good job, as opposed to an okay job, so that sense of there's never any complacency. There's never any like, oh, I can do this. It's always like, oh my God, this, I'm in a panic. So, I do have hope because I know I've done stuff before. It's not totally hopeless.
Do you think that's a Jewish thing or just an artist thing or just a person thing?
It's definitely an artist thing. There's no question that everybody struggles. I'm sure you know that you struggle with the next thing, and is it going to be good and interesting and all of those things, and am I going to enjoy working on it? Does it have meaning, or is it just a big bore? And then I can add a couple of layers of being a woman, of being Jewish, and of the perpetual mistrust and the perpetual insecurity. It's like, a friend of mine just said she had a fantastic millefeuille, and I thought, well, that's exactly what, they're just the layers and layers of, complexity and self-criticism, with cream in between, with delightful cream in between.
I love that. That's great. So one of my best friends and I spent a lot of time talking about the difference between guilt and shame, two of my favorite subjects. And you've written a book called Still Life with Remorse, which I heartily recommend and everybody should buy. It's linked in the chat there. But you sort of talk about it, I think, in the book. But for you, why Still Life with Remorse instead of Still Life with Regret?
That's a question that a lot of people are, what's the difference? And I always say my kind of stock response is, I regret I burnt the roast, I am sorry I ruined your life. That's remorse. There's regret of like, I'm sorry I ruined the roast, but I'm sorry I ruined your life is remorse. And there's real degrees of difference there, unless you think the roast is the most important thing, in which case you wouldn't mind having your life ruined. But that the guilt of wondering and or knowing that you've done really terrible things in emotional relationships and continue to.
I would say from reading the book, a lot of the stories you write certainly can't be your remorse. They must be somebody else's remorse because they're not things that you actually did to the people you're writing
I've
about.
kept myself very innocent in this whole situation, haven't I? But no, but in fact, I do have remorse, which I won't go into now. But I also can feel a kind of tribal remorse, the story about my sister and how she was sent away when she was a little girl for her health. She did come back home. Some people thought she never came back, but she did. But that sense of what a group can do unknowingly, the best intentions or not the best intentions, and the kind of the bumbling, muddling through life, one event after another. I mean, you have to feel bad about some of it.
Yeah, I love that idea of tribal remorse. And then I guess you have to figure out who your tribe is, which could be
Yeah, that's
there's the close tribe,
yeah.
big tribe. So, you know, you had asked me before if I wanted you to read something from your book, and I think I would, if you don't
Sure.
mind, just so that
Yeah,
people get a little flavor of it. And
yeah.
just, if you could hold up it when you read something, because the illustrations to me are also so beautiful.
Right.
And they're almost like a separate story within the story in a way.
I
So
decided that story that to illustrate remorse required a completely different approach, and that I was interested in still lifes and how beautiful, and they sit there and they don't move, but also how beautiful they are and how much objects contain so many emotions and memories. They're not static things. They live in their own way. So this story I'll read is called Uncle. And it has a painting next to it of objects from Matisse's studio, so who I clearly revere. Once our uncle sat in a gigantic black inner tube and floated in the sea. He fell asleep and drifted farther and farther from the shore. He was a tiny dot in the sea. People went out in a boat to rescue him. He could have been swept out to sea, but he was not, but he could have. This is what we call the possible probable remorse tense. Suffering after the fact over a disaster that could possibly have happened, but did not. This tense occurs very frequently in our household, daily, even hourly. So that tells you what kind of state we're in our household. The potential for disaster is constant. And I will jump to the heritage, the legacy of my family, because my father, especially, who lost his whole family when he left, but they didn't leave Belarus, was this kind of, life is precarious, literally, not conceptually, and that we're in danger. So that really, as a child, when you hear that over and over, that stays in your bones.
well, yeah, and that was something I also wanted to talk to you about is, um, certainly in this book, but in a lot of your work, there's a lot of heartache, and I think a lot of the heartache gets kind of um, not overlooked, but I think it's easier to not fully absorb it because of the way you draw and the way you think and the way you tell stories, which is with a lot of humor, but it's not sardonic humor. It's really, but it's not sappy humor either. And so I think sometimes aren't really hearing exactly what you're saying. But then it stays with you, which I love. I think it's a way for people to take in all of this. And yet I do feel that, like you said, your family's had a lot of heartache. You personally have had a lot of heartache, and yet there is always this feeling of hopefulness that shines through. Maybe that's a survivor's instinct or something like that. But I was wondering, do you think that's just part of your DNA, or is it something you learned from somebody? Did you have a role model for this? Can you learn that kind of attitude or feeling?
I think that you can, I don't know if you can learn it, but you can appreciate it. Certainly the level of humor being used as a tool to survive and as just as an exchange of family stories was very, very strong in our family. And I always say about my kids, if they didn't have a sense of humor, I would have sent them away to and never welcomed them back. But that I think that it's part of the language of the family. So I also understood that through my parents' difficult marriage, there was a way, some child becomes the kind of joker. And that was my escape. That was my way of coping with things. And so I can deliver, I can talk about grief and also be funny, a few sentences later. Because I think, otherwise that would be very heavy reading.
Yeah. What was your mom like? Because you did a whole exhibition, I think, with your son about her, and you've written about her here and there. And actually, it was funny when I was talking to a friend of mine about doing this today. She actually lived in the same building as your mother, who she
Really?
adored. Yeah.
Oh my God. She knew my mother?
She knew your mother and said that she just loved her. And she said she was so proud of you. She used to always have clippings of anything that
Wow.
you were doing. Yeah. So, but what was she like?
Well, she was very, very beautiful. I mean, she was really a beauty. She was kind of like the femme fatale of Tel Aviv when she first got there in the 30s and 40s, but always was beautiful, beautifully dressed, cared very much. Loman's was Mecca to us, and we just, or Lord and Taylor. I think those are the two places where she felt most at home in the world. And she was very irreverent, but the installation that my son is Alex Kalman, and he has a small museum on Cortlandt Avenue, Cortlandt Alley, called Museum on Lower Manhattan, in a defunct elevator shaft. And we installed a replica of my mother's closet after she had died, because she only wore white, which was something that she codified after her divorce, because everybody in the Middle East is wearing white. It's not unusual. And she just had this fantastic, I mean, if any of you can find Sarah Berman, the map of the United States that Sarah Berman made, I think you can look it up and you'll find it online. It's hilarious. And I think that she had a great sense of humor, a great devotion to her family, a great love of being in the moment, of mailing a letter, or, buying a lemon for something, as I say in the book. So she was attentive. She was really mindful in a way that she would never imagine anybody would describe her. She was our Buddhist, our Jewish, she wasn't really a Buddhist, but you know what I mean.
Judas, yeah.
Right.
Somebody wrote in the Q&A, how did writing the book change your feelings of remorse? Do you feel less of it?
Well, you know what? At first I felt I had even more remorse before, because then all the stories were coming at me. And also people were telling me every time you mention that to somebody, they explode with stories of their remorse. But then I thought, as I listened to my advice, well, enough of that. And then the question is, can you decide not to worry? Can you decide not to, I mean, you can't not worry about your children. That's kind of off limits for not worrying. But can you kind of turn your lens and just say, I did the best I could, which I say so often.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. So when I was preparing to talk to you today, I went to Goodreads because I always am curious to see what kind of interesting things people post on Goodreads. And for this book, there was mostly fabulous reviews in it. But there was one that said one star, and they didn't like the book. They dismissed it because you're a colonizer. And I presume that means because you were born in Israel and you have,
Okay.
and so, yeah. And
Wow.
it just sort of took me aback. But then I was, in one of the other things that I was reading, you have spent a lot of time in Israel. You lived there as a child, and then you were born there. And then you said that you had been there within the last year after October 7th. And what I was wondering is, what was it like to be there now? And what has it been like in New York for you talking to friends about your feelings about Israel.
Right. Well, I have to say to the to the one-star person, even though, it's, of course, it's a futile kind of conversation, is that I wouldn't be alive if Palestine didn't exist and Israel didn't exist. My parents wouldn't be alive. I wouldn't be alive. My children, there are a lot of people that wouldn't be alive, and you wouldn't be enjoying a nice conversation with me now if it were not for a place that allowed Jews to come after the Holocaust or during the Holocaust or before the Holocaust. So colonizer is an extraordinary word to use. I have to say that, of course, the first thing anybody says is how complicated this situation is, how terrible it is for everybody. And that all I can say is that I adore Israel. I adore my life there. And I'm also, miserable over the war. And I feel that when I look at my family, as I said, I have a lot of right-wing relatives, a lot of left-wing relatives in the middle. And despite this unbelievable conflict amongst themselves and with all the people in the neighboring countries, I don't know, I don't know, I still hope that one day there'll be some kind of, can I even use the word peace?
I know, I wish you could. You can use it. I don't know if
Yeah, I don't
anybody
know.
will
Yeah.
hear it.
Right. So, I think that I don't know what to say. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you don't mind, I'd like to just ask you one more question on this because it has been kind of, I don't even know what the word is over the last year to see the level of discourse about Israel, which is so polarized and so, didactic. And yet I think somebody with your experience of being a New Yorker and I guess at some level an Israeli, um, have you had discussions that have been disturbing for you with the people in the art world or
Oh, yeah. There
friends?
are only disturbing conversations. There's nothing but disturbing conversations. And, at a certain point, you have to say, on one level, as I end this book by saying, at a certain point, you can't talk anymore because I don't think anybody changes anybody's mind. I don't think anybody is convinced. I think once you're on your, in your belief system, that's what you believe. So it's kind of like, flailing at the windmills. So now I just say, as I say, it's an incredibly complicated situation, and there's really nothing that I can say that would add to anybody's knowledge or wisdom.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but that's okay. You can say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because I feel like throughout your career, you've you've I feel like you've tried to find a way to talk about things that are incredibly disturbing and incredibly hot button, go back to the New Yorker cover after 9/11,
Right.
when you and Rick Meyerowitz did that incredible cover with Kvechnia. That was my favorite location. Just to remind people, if you could talk about that, because that was also, such a shocking moment in my lifetime, and certainly in my time living in New York, of when every thing just seemed turned completely upside down, and there was so much hatred in the air and so much uncertainty. And you came at it with a crazy kind of humor in a way but that
Right.
was also deep. So would you mind just telling a little bit about that map? Because I think it's kind of relevant to now in some ways.
It came out a few months after 9/11, and it's called New Yorkistan. And Rick Meyerowitz, who's a humorist and an illustrator, and I were just talking about the complexity of what had happened, and we didn't know any of these, names and these places. And so, I mean, maybe other people did, but and then so as we do, we started making jokes about where we were in New York. So we were able to turn it on ourselves and turn the humor on ourselves and make fun of New Yorkers and make fun of the tribalism of New Yorkers, from, the people who wear pashmina to, as you say, to, Kvechnia. And we had the khakis and the car keys in Connecticut, which I thought was clever. So there was a lot of being able to do wordplay at a time when people really were very appreciative of that sense of humor and saying, you know, you're at a certain point, you're allowed to laugh.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is just a question of getting older myself or whatever it is. I feel like people laugh a lot less now. I sort of feel like there's less room for, aside from, straight on political humor on late night television or something.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that you could do a cover like that today or about the world situation? Do you think that there's still room for a more whimsical approach to the crazy times we're living in?
Well, I'll tell you that Rick and I did a map that wasn't in the New Yorker, but was in another magazine, and it was called the Shithole Map, and it was Trump's version of the world. And it was so fun. I won't even go into it now because I don't even know if you can find it online. But every other country was worse than the next. And it was, this mad Trumpian perspective. So I think that, you really, it's case by case. It's not I would never generalize and say, one can't do, because you don't know what's going to come around the corner and you're able to address in a humanistic way, not in a sarcastic, not in a violent way, the things that are around you that might be funny or absurd. Maybe we can talk more about the absurd. And there's, one of the things that came out of the book was that my son and I made 4 little movies about remorse, and I played 4 different characters. So one of them is Clara Schumann, because she's in the book. And she's remorseful. And one of them is Martha Graham. She's not in the book, but I decided I wanted to dance. And then Franz Kafka, who is also, a character in that. So in my way, I'm traveling into another land of trying to find humor and a way of expressing the absurd, which is, the Kafkaesque world that we're in. And within that, there are millions of wonderful things going on. And that's, that the lesson from this is look inward, look to your family and look to your work, and you will find great joy and great humor in the day. I think if you're able to, everybody's different.
Is there a way can people see those movies? That sounds great.
Not yet. We're going to, I want to say that I'm going to be speaking at the Morgan Library January 9th, because there's going to be a panel discussion of artists responding to Kafka, because there's a Kafka show at the Morgan now, which is great. So we'll be doing some bigger thing with the films, but right now they're just for very private release. We're testing the waters. Yeah.
So in the book, you have a lot of references to your own family, but then other families, Clara Schumann, the Tolstoys are there. So you just have to sort of tell us how just the process of writing this book, and I think with you, it's interesting because it's a double process, right? Because do you come up with the images of the pictures first and then write the stories? I mean, it's just looking at the table of contents, you go from the Tolstoys and then to Belarus and then to Pesach. It's an interesting leap. And so, who's the tribe?
Well, the nice thing is I don't have any restraints, in that once I decide on what the subject is, then I allow myself to be on point and then to digress radically. Always knowing that I'm somehow winding back. So the paintings sometimes come first, the writing sometimes comes first. It's an organic process of going back and forth. And I just am drawn, if I see a painting by Delacroix and I want to copy it, and I think I may have been Delacroix in a past life, then I'm going to tell you that. So, and if I have a very sad story about my father, and if it all feels right, it's all about instinct and about feeling it. There isn't kind of any, there's no recipe for knowing. That's, as we know, that's the struggle. So to build it. And so I only paint in my studio, but I can go anywhere and write. So I can write on a bench or write in a cafe. And that kind of is a very pleasant excursion. And then I go back to my studio and I can paint. And then I can edit and assemble. Well, what painting goes with what story? So, it's a very pleasurable, when I'm not suffering, it's a very pleasurable experience.
Yes. So I see the piano in the background, and I know you played yourself, and I assume still do. Do you have music on when you're working, or music off?
I always have music on. It's always classical. Usually it's QXR, but sometimes I go into a loop and listen to a piece, like the Goldberg variations 100
Mhm.
times. And so, yeah, for me, music is very critical for the wonderfulness of being able to be in a studio and listen to music and to mix colors and paint. It's really I'm very fortunate.
Um, so somebody named Gretchen Grant found a link to the shithole map, and it's
Oh,
posted in the chat. So people who want to look at the shithole map, there it is. And
that's
somebody else has posted a review of the smallest museum in New York. So
oh,
we're getting constant
that's
links
lovely.
as we're talking, which is great.
And
So,
if and if you can find Sarah Burma's map of the US, it'll round out your day. Your weekend will be complete.
that's great. That's perfect. So we were talking before the program started about the curtain from American Utopia. Um, but before you get to the curtain, could you just tell people a little bit about your friendship and long collaboration ship? Is that a word? Long collaboration with David Byrne? How you met, how you
Right.
have worked together.
So my late husband, Tibor Kalman, was a brilliant designer, editor, uh, really a journalist. And we had a design studio called M and Co, the letter M and Co. And the Talking Heads, and this is in the 80s, and the Talking Heads were our clients. So we got to know David and worked on different projects with the group. And then the first book that I illustrated, my first children's book, was Stay Up Late, from the album Little Creatures that David had written, that song. And so it was my entree into publishing and a wonderful beginning of a relationship with him. So, fast forward, I don't know how many years, what is that, 30, 40 more years? I was able to collaborate with him on this show curtain for his sublime show, American Utopia. I mean, that was one of the great moments of that, the year before and after the pandemic. And so I did these drawings that became this massive curtain that you saw before the show began. And then the curtain went up and then the music entered and you were in heaven.
And then what happened to the curtain?
And then the curtain came back to me into my living room, this massive thing. And Alex, my son Alex, and I cut it up with great care, and we sold it, the pieces.
Had you thought about doing that, but was that always your intention, or how did that idea even
Oh,
happen?
it's one of those things where the curtain was so massive, somebody came and said, where do you want the submarine lady? It's one of those moments. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I knew that I wanted it. And so when we, in thinking about it, we said, well, this might be a nice idea to just put it into pieces. And it was tremendous fun to cut it up. And David thought it was a great idea too. So I'm happy that he was pleased. Because
So
I,
did you actually cut it by
my
hand?
my dear son Alex Kalman cut it.
He cut it with scissors?
Yeah, you do a snip and then you rip. And then there's edging it with a kind of a glue that prevents fraying. And then ironing. I ironed a lot of pieces. We had help. And then the beautiful wrapping of it and the packaging of it. And it came with a sticker that says, your piece of utopia. And the wonderful thing about David also is that there's no cynicism in it, that the sentiment is pure belief in humanity and pure appreciation of the vastness of, differences of people. So, and we have a similar, feeling that I don't paint from sarcasm or mocking. I really do love all the people I portray.
Yeah, no, well, that definitely comes across in the work. So you once said, I just prefer to have a quiet evening and to go to bed quite early and then be optimistic the next morning as opposed to dark and morose at night. So I guess there's two questions coming
Right.
out of that. Did you write Still Life with Remorse at night or in the morning?
Oh, I never write it. No, I mean it. When I'm done, when the sun goes down, I'm done. And in the winter, I'm really done quite early. So I do go to bed early and I read and I watch murder mysteries every single night. So Remorse was begun in Italy in a beautiful setting on the ocean. It was the opposite of Remorse, it's just like, what could be nicer? And so I can't do anything at night. I'm useless.
Yeah. Oh, somebody just wrote, it was a brilliant curtain and totally relevant to American Utopia. I wish I'd known parts were for sale, though I have several photos, and you told me that it sold out, right?
And yeah, very quickly. I think, because the sense of this is like once in a lifetime, this thing that had a connection to David and to the Talking Heads. And it was really meaningful for that was an important time musically and culturally for people back in the day. So this was a nice return.
Yeah. So you've lived in the village for a long time, right? In Greenwich Village, that's sort of your stalking ground, pretty much.
Yeah, I've lived here for many decades in this apartment. Yeah.
Amazing. And then I read someplace you lived on Cornelia Street for a little while.
Yes, before that, we lived in a fifth floor walk up with a tub in the kitchen, as one does.
That's great. That's great. So, what's your day like? I mean,
It's a nice day. The thing that I was as a child was a daydreamy kind of child. And my mother, and as I say, amongst other incredible attributes, is that she never stopped me from being a daydreamer and never insisted that I be realistic or pragmatic ever. And so my day is I wake up very, very early and I read the obits and I have a cup of coffee and then I go for a walk and then I either wander around and or I go, if I have a deadline, I'm in the studio. And the nature of it is that it's about surprise and it's about falling in love. And I find so many things during the day to fall in love with that there's no lack of subject. There's no lack of interest. And it really is a very optimistic situation. And then it doesn't last all the time, obviously, but it's something that I believe in, that you can look back and say, I did my work. That's okay.
yeah. So I liked in that very quick recitation of your day's activities, you said, and then I start the day, I read the obits. Was that always the first thing? Was that always the first thing you read in the daytime, or is that a relatively new phenomenon?
No. I never read the paper and I never listen to the news because I find it a terrifying waste of time. And so, and heartbreaking every minute. So and it's going to happen with or without me. So I figure I can do other things. It doesn't need me, the news. And so I think that the obits are fantastic little mini biographies, and you're you're kind of making an epic statement at the beginning of the day. Who are these people? What do they do? And what's important, and now what do you do with your day? So I'm not inventing, the bunt pan or the brassiere, but I am, doing my work, my writing and my painting. And I think, good, that's what you have to do. That's it. Persevere.
The bunt pan or the brassiere, I love that juxtaposition as two great inventions.
There were a few wonderful obits of the years that jumped to mind.
Oh, I see the great brassiere inventor or whatever. That's great. I love that. Um, uh, I think at this point, I would really love to hear something else from your book, because
Sure.
I think that the stories are so beautiful, and now we learning a little bit about the way your mind works. It would be great to revisit one of these passages.
Okay, this is called Sundoku. I was limping down the street in Tel Aviv and ran into my cousin. She is a great swimmer and a great reader. She swims during the day and reads at night and eats ice cream while reading. She has piles of books, many unread. There is a word for that in Japanese, tsundoku, and it is not a criticism. It is meant as a delight. Beautiful stacks of books that may never be read, but simply sit happily in your room, smiling at you. My cousin's father was in love with my mother when they were very young. He was adopted by my family after his family had been murdered in the Holocaust. He had 4 brothers who did not come to Palestine. In the little village of Lenin in Belarus, the Nazis forced one brother to kill the other. My cousin's father was very gentle and kind. He had a crooked finger, which always fascinated me. He came into the kitchen to talk to my Aunt Shoshana. She gave him a glass of seltzer, and I looked at his finger. He always smiled, but also looked like he was on the verge of crying. His face was all crinkled up. My cousin said he was an angel. You can't decide to be an angel. It has to be in your essence. That's that story. And Tsundoko, he was a wonderful man, but Tsundoko is really a great find of a word, because I'm sure many of us have piles and piles of books. When will we read them? And you feel guilty and you feel, it's a mess. And then you say, oh, no, actually, that's fabulous. They're just there, happy to be with us.
Well, somebody just popped up a comment saying, I adore this book. As a daughter of Holocaust survivors and a person who has piles of books everywhere, I treasure these pages. Yeah, no, I think that's right to make, that the books we read or don't read are maybe as important as the ones we do. I'm fascinated by what you said earlier about not listening to the news at all, because you've been kind of in addition to so many other things, a journalist, really. You've gone out investigating the pursuit of happiness and the meaning of democracy, and you've interviewed Ruth Bader Ginsburg, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you, where do you get your information from?
I mean, that's a funny thing. Where do I get my information? Well, when I was doing those projects for the New York Times, there was a set construct which I would do research for, and I would do research about, the Constitution or Thomas Jefferson or, Lincoln. That I love doing. I love doing research and getting more piles of books about the people and really creating my own story. But that's what I have to do. In the end, I have to create my own story, and that comes from within. That comes, of course, not being totally ignorant, but it also comes from a personal poetic perspective. What am I making of this story, and what's important to me? And I want to paint Abraham Lincoln's favorite cake in this column that I did for the Times. Well, that's relevant. So or his favorite apples. So I think that it's really important to see it from your own unique point of view, and not to be bound by what is it supposed to be? What am I supposed to know? Because that, I think, is really anathema to creativity.
So,
and I used the word anathema. I got the word anathema in this, so
I was very impressed.
Thank you. I try to use that every day.
But we just got a friendly 5-minute warning, so oh my gosh. But I do want to know, what do you read? Do you read do you read the New Yorker? You did covers for it.
No.
You don't look inside?
No, I don't really, I've put myself in a kind of bubble, a bubble for my happiness. I read a lot of, I'm reading, this is my second cycle of reading Proust, all 7 volumes with a group. Wow. A few years reading as many Shakespeare plays as I could. And I'm just, from, Sebald to Bernhardt to Ginsburg to it's an endless amount of reading that one can do. And I would rather spend my time doing that than hearing about the things that you can't do anything about anyway.
I think that this is the most important thing people can carry away from this incredible interview, is that piece of advice, because I do think so many of us, including myself, waste way too much time. Do you have a cell phone? I
have a pigeon and a cat. No, of course I do have a cell phone. I know how to use it, and but I don't, I like, I email and I speak. I do all those things. So I'm not completely out of the world, but, just kind of half in, half out.
Well, that sounds really,
it's working.
Really great. Yes, it is. So do you have anything in the works, projects now that you're working on that people can look for in the next while?
Well, I will, the next book that I'm working on, the booklet that my son and I will do before I do an actual published book, as I said in this piece, was about after remorse, there's nothing else to do but joy. So the next book that I'm doing is joy. And then I'm also doing a book about trees and gardens, and I'm going to spend 3 or 4 months going to different gardens in Europe and hanging out under trees. What could be better?
That sounds just incredible. And what is it like to work with your son? You worked with your late
Oh,
husband, and now you
yeah.
have this. I'm so jealous. It sounds incredible.
It is, so far so good. I say the night is young. You never know what's going to happen. But it's also, as I said earlier, the family language of design and curiosity and humor are very, very strong in both, in both my daughter Lulu and in my son Alex. So it's an extraordinary honor and privilege. I can't believe that. And as long as it lasts, one day he might fire me, but we'll see what happens.
So
Now,
I'm sure fans of Hey Willie See the Pyramids, which started this whole thing a while ago,
right.
that opening of that book I just loved. It's just the black page and the white words, and it's Hey Lulu, read me another story. Isn't that it? Something like that. Just one more story, and it's Lulu and Alexander. So what is Lulu doing? Is she I think she's within the food. She makes
Yes.
food.
She's in the conference world. She organizes conferences that have have a food component. So she's doing more of that, and she lives in Vermont with her 3 daughters, which I'm about to take a run to a train to go visit them. And so she has this amazing life out of New York, and we all wonder how she does it, but so it's quite amazing, and we're all I mean, and I do want to say, of course, the inspiration of having children. When Lulu and Alex were born, I mean, I sort of knew what my role was in the world, and that's when the children's book started. So I'm grateful to them. I have to tell them. I'm going to tell them when I see them.
Oh, that's great. So before they were born, you had never thought of doing children's books.
No,
That was,
I was an illustrator and writer, but I didn't know how to put it all together. But when they were born, and all of the mayhem and the magic of having children, it was clear that I was meant to do that. So yeah, it was good.
well, so have a wonderful time with your family. This has been such a pleasure. And thank goodness the Lulu and Alex were born so that we all got to get these wonderful children books and other books. And I'm sure there are many other reasons to be thankful as well.
Probably we'll try to find them. But thank you very much. This was lovely speaking to you.
Yeah,
So happy holidays.
happy holidays to you
Full
too. And
holidays.
here's to joy. I love that as something
Enjoy.
to look forward to.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Be well.
Okay.